December 7th, 1941, 7:49 a.m. Oahu, Hawaii. The first wave comes in low over the water with the sun behind it, engines roaring like metal saws tearing open the morning. Men on the decks of American battleships look up into the glare, squinting, confused for a fraction of a second before the red circles on the wings resolve into something unmistakable. Then the bombs begin to fall. On the bridge of the Japanese flagship far to the north, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo receives reports in clipped bursts. The strike has achieved surprise. Torpedoes are running true, battleships are hit, airfields are burning. The officers around him do not cheer in any wild, uncontrolled way. This is not that kind of room. It is tighter than that, disciplined, almost ceremonial. But shoulders loosen. Pens move quickly across plotting boards. A few eyes meet in quiet satisfaction. This is the opening move they had trained for years. Men in the Imperial Japanese Navy had studied the United States the way a duelist studies a larger opponent. They knew America had immense industrial capacity. They knew its steel output dwarfed Japan's. They knew its shipyards, oil, and machine tools could become a tidal force if fully awakened. Admirals like Isoroku Yamamoto understood this more clearly than most. He had seen America. He had watched its factories and its roads and its appetite for production. He had warned that a long war would be disastrous. But war planning is not built only from fear. It is built from assumptions. And one assumption sat beneath the entire operation like a hidden keel, that a sudden, devastating blow would shatter American confidence long enough for Japan to seize its defensive perimeter, fortify it, and force a negotiated peace before the United States had the will to fight through the Pacific mile by mile. In staff rooms in Tokyo, in fleet conferences, in war games. The same idea returned in different forms. Americans were seen as materially powerful, but spiritually soft. A nation of industry, yes, but also a nation presumed to be impatient, casualty-averse, divided, comfortable. If struck hard enough, it might choose compromise over endurance. That belief did not come from nowhere. Japanese naval officers watched American politics before the war and saw isolationism. They saw bitter debates over intervention in Europe. They saw a public that did not want another bloodletting like 1917 and 1918. They saw distance across the Pacific and imagined reluctance. They measured ships, guns, and fuel, but they also tried to measure national character. That was harder, and they got it wrong. At Pearl Harbor, none of that uncertainty is visible yet. What is visible is smoke. At Battleship Row, men scramble barefoot across hot steel slick with oil and seawater. Bugles, shouted orders, ruptured steam lines, machine gun fire. A sailor drags another by the collar as a second explosion throws both men flat. At Ford Island, aircraft burn wingtip to wingtip. Black columns climb into a blue Hawaiian sky. The shock is total, not just tactical but emotional. For a brief window, it looks like the Japanese gamble has worked exactly as intended. Nagumo's staff receives the first wave success reports, then the second wave launch updates. Pilots report heavy damage, airfields suppressed, enemy resistance increasing but disorganized. The Japanese carriers remain undetected long enough to preserve the striking force. The operation, by immediate naval standards, is a triumph. Yet even in triumph, the limits are already there. The American aircraft carriers are not in harbor. Fuel storage tanks remain intact. Repair facilities, dry docks, and the industrial base beyond Hawaii are untouched. These are not details to men thinking in terms of a short campaign and decisive fleet action. They are future turning points, still invisible in the smoke. Back in Japan, headlines and celebrations will frame Pearl Harbor as proof that boldness can overcome mass. Officers who favored aggressive expansion will point to the burning battleships as evidence that the Empire has seized initiative from a slower, richer enemy. In the Navy, there is relief that the opening strike succeeded where failure would have meant catastrophe. But beneath the relief sits a dangerous comfort. The attack confirms what many already wanted to believe. That surprise and spirit can offset capacity. That a stunned America will hesitate. That the psychological blow matters more than the arithmetic of shipyards and oil refineries. That time, if bought by violence, can be held by fortifications and courage. In Washington, the effect is the opposite. The shock does not produce paralysis. It produces unity. And thousands of miles from the men plotting courses and strike cycles in the Pacific, in factories not yet on wartime footing, on assembly lines not yet running around the clock, in offices that will soon convert contracts into production schedules, a different kind of answer is beginning to move. Slow at first, then relentless. The admirals who planned the opening blow have won the morning. They do not yet understand what they have awakened. December 10th, 1941. Off the coast of Malaya, the sea is gray and restless under a hard sky when Japanese torpedo bombers find the British battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse. The attacks come in fast, disciplined runs, low over the waves, engines straining as anti-aircraft fire climbs toward them in black bursts. Torpedoes enter the water and streak white. Steel buckles. Lists deepen. Men jump into oil and foam. When both capital ships go down, the message ripples across naval staffs everywhere. Air power has just humiliated prestige steel again. For Japanese commanders, the result reinforces the momentum that began at Pearl Harbor. In a matter of days, their forces are striking in multiple directions across the Pacific and Southeast Asia with speed that feels almost unreal. Hong Kong, Guam, Wake, the Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. Operation maps spread across tables in Tokyo and at fleet headquarters begin to look less like projections and more like fulfilled prophecy. Colored pins move south and east. Supply officers calculate tonnage. Aviation staffs track losses and replacements. Senior officers, many of them trained in the old doctrine of decisive battle, now watch a modern naval war unfold in a way that seems to reward bold, synchronized offense. In wardrooms and flag cabins, there is no single voice, no simple chorus of arrogance. Some officers remain cautious. Yamamoto himself stays haunted by the industrial imbalance he knows too well. But strategic optimism grows because events are moving in Japan's favor, and fast victories have a way of hardening assumptions into doctrine. The belief at the center remains intact. Hit hard, expand quickly, build an outer defensive perimeter, force the Americans to cross enormous distances under mounting losses, make the price unbearable, make the war politically exhausting, make negotiation possible. It is not madness, it is calculation, but the calculation depends on time behaving in a certain way. Japanese admirals imagine a sequence. America reels, Japan fortifies. The perimeter becomes a wall of islands, airfields, naval anchorages, and submarines. Attrition does the rest. The Americans, presumed impatient, will eventually decide the Pacific is too expensive in blood and treasure. They will settle for a compromise that leaves Japan dominant in East Asia. To men trained in the memory of Tsushima and the language of decisive engagement, this model feels coherent. It has logic, shape, even elegance. Yet it contains a fatal blind spot. It treats American mobilization as a delayed threat, but not a transforming one. It assumes the United States will respond like a wounded rival, not like an industrial civilization converting itself into a war machine. In the first months, that distinction is easy to miss. At sea, Japanese naval aviation is still among the finest in the world. Carrier decks are busy with experienced crews. Pilots who trained for years fly with confidence and precision. Destroyers cut through tropical waters under moonlight. Amphibious landings unfold in one harbor after another. Army and Navy officers, often rivals in policy, now share the energy of success. Dispatches read like momentum made visible. And yet the war is already changing shape. In the Philippines, American and Filipino forces resist. At Wake Island, Marines and defenders strike back before being overwhelmed. In the Coral Sea and beyond, carrier warfare begins to evolve into something less predictable than pre-war planning tables suggested. Every action consumes aircraft, trained pilots, fuel, shipping, and maintenance capacity. Every victory has a cost. For Japan, those costs are harder to replace than many would admit in public. Inside staff discussions, some officers begin using sharper language about logistics, tankers, spare parts, merchant shipping vulnerability, pilot attrition, operational tempo. The empire is expanding faster than it can fully secure the sea lanes that connect it. Success is stretching the system. Still, the assumption about America remains the anchor. They only need to hold long enough. They only need to bloody the enemy enough. The American public, they think, has limits. Then the first signs of a different reality begin to appear, not always on battle maps, but in reports, estimates, and industrial intelligence. American shipbuilding schedules accelerate, aircraft production climbs, training pipelines expand. Civilian factories begin conversion at a scale difficult to picture, even for officers who have studied American output figures on paper. What had been abstract numbers before the war now starts becoming a visible process. A damaged ship can be repaired faster than expected. New hulls are laid down. New aircraft arrive. Replacement pools thicken. The United States is not merely absorbing the opening blow, it is reorganizing around it. For Japanese admirals who expected shock to produce hesitation, this is the first strategic tremor. Not panic, not yet, but unease. Because a short war requires the enemy to act according to your timetable. And America is already refusing the timetable. By early 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy still possesses initiative and lethal striking power. Its officers can point to conquest after conquest. They can still believe that one more crushing battle, one more carrier triumph, one more demonstration of offensive spirit will stabilize the empire's gains and break American resolve before industrial superiority fully arrives at the front. But the clock they thought they had started at Pearl Harbor is no longer theirs alone. Somewhere in meeting rooms lit by shaded lamps, with maps pinned tight and casualty sheets stacked beside operational orders, admirals begin to confront a thought they do not voice easily if the Americans do not tire. Then every month favors them. And if every month favors them, then Japan's early victories are no longer steps toward settlement. They are borrowed time. June 4th, 1942. Before dawn. North Pacific, northwest of Midway Atoll. The carrier decks are black shapes under a dim sky, lit in patches by signal lamps and shielded lights. Men move in practiced silence around aircraft lined wing to wing, hands on bomb carts, fuel hoses, chocks. The sea rolls beneath the task force with a steady heave. Above it, the air is cool, salted, almost calm. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands at the center of a machine built for timing. On paper, the operation is bold and intricate. Midway will be struck, the Americans will respond, and the Imperial Japanese Navy will destroy the enemy carriers in a decisive battle. It is the kind of plan that promises not just tactical victory, but strategic restoration. Pearl Harbor shocked the enemy. Midway, if successful, could break the backbone of American naval resistance in the Pacific for many Japanese admirals. This is the moment to confirm that the war can still be shaped on their terms. The first strike launches into the morning gray. Engines rise, one after another. Then the deck shakes as aircraft race forward and lift into the darkening blue. Reports begin returning. Midway has been hit, but not neutralized. A second strike may be needed. Nagumo faces the kind of decision that looks manageable in peacetime exercises and poisonous in war. Rearm reserve aircraft for another attack on the island, or prepare immediately for anti-ship strikes if American carriers are near. Then comes the message that changes the rhythm of the day. Enemy ships reported, unclear composition, then revised information. American carriers may be present. From that point forward, the air on the flagship seems to tighten. Orders shift. Bombs are moved. Torpedoes are brought up. Aircraft on hangar decks are serviced, reconfigured, armed and rearmed. Fuel lines snake across steel. Munitions carts crowd spaces never meant for hesitation. The Japanese carriers are still powerful, still capable of delivering a devastating blow, but the margin for error narrows with every minute. American attacks begin arriving in fragments. First come land-based aircraft from Midway, then torpedo squadrons from US carriers. They attack bravely and suffer horribly. Japanese fighters descend on them. Anti-aircraft guns hammer the sky. Torpedo planes fall burning into the sea or crash in spray without scoring hits. On Japanese decks and bridges, officers watch this and see confirmation of superiority. Enemy attacks are uncoordinated. Their pilots are reckless. The Kido Butai still appears in control. But control in carrier warfare can vanish in moments. As Japanese fighters drop low to finish off torpedo planes, the sky above opens. American dive bombers appear almost without warning out of breaks in the cloud, high and aligned for attack. Lookouts shout, sirens scream. Helm orders come hard over voice tubes and signal circuits. Carriers begin violent evasive turns, but the timing is wrong now. Fatally wrong. Decks and hangars are crowded. Fuel and ordnance are exposed. Aircraft are being serviced. Bombs fall. On Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, impacts tear through decks and ignite the prepared chaos below. Fire erupts in sheets. Explosions roll through hangar spaces. Aviation fuel flashes. Smoke towers upward in thick black columns visible for miles. Damage control parties rush into heat and shrapnel with hoses and masks and bare hands. Men drag the wounded through smoke so dense it burns the lungs. Officers try to restore communication as wires fail and compartments become furnaces. Within minutes, 3 carriers that had embodied Japanese striking power are mortally wounded. Later in the day, Hiryu launches counterattacks and strikes back, damaging the American carrier Yorktown. For a few hours, there is still action, still resistance, still the reflex of offensive doctrine. But by nightfall, the balance has shifted in a way no dispatch can soften. Hiryu too is found and hit. Flames rise from a 4th carrier. The loss is not only material, it is institutional. Japan can replace some ships. Eventually. It can build, it can improvise. But what burns at Midway includes veteran air crews, flight deck teams, command experience, and the invisible cohesion of a force sharpened over years. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the battle with elite carrier strength concentrated in one striking arm. Now that blade is shattered. For admirals who believed a decisive engagement would force America toward exhaustion, Midway delivers the reverse. It is Japan that suffers the irrecoverable blow first. In the days that follow, the language in reports becomes more careful, more technical, sometimes evasive in tone. Losses are listed, causes are assessed, timing, reconnaissance, enemy contact reports, tactical sequence. No officer writes that an entire strategic assumption has been wounded. Institutions rarely confess that in the immediate aftermath of disaster. But inside the Navy, among serious men reading production estimates and replacement figures, the meaning is clear enough. The Americans are not collapsing. They are learning. They are taking losses and returning with more carriers. more planes, more pilots in training. Their command structure absorbs mistakes and adapts. Their industrial base continues to accelerate behind the front. Midway is not the end of the war. It is the end of the belief that Japan can reliably control the pace of the war through bold offensive blows alone. This is the first deep fracture in the illusion, and once that fracture opens, every future battle will widen it. In flag conferences and planning rooms after Midway, Japanese admirals still speak of opportunities. They still plan operations. They still seek favorable engagements. But beneath the maps, beneath the doctrine, beneath the formal language of naval professionalism, a harder question begins to follow them from meeting to meeting. What if America does not tire before Japan runs out of what it cannot replace? August 7th, 1942, dawn, off Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Rain squalls drift over dark water and green jungle as American transports and warships appear through the morning haze. On the island, half-finished Japanese airfield works lie exposed between palms and mud. Engines rumble offshore. Then the bombardment begins. Naval guns punching orange flashes through wet air. Shells crashing inland in geysers of dirt and timber. For Japanese commanders in the South Pacific, the landing is a shock not because it is impossible, but because it comes so soon. The Americans are not waiting. They seize the unfinished airfield, soon to be called Henderson Field, and with that one move the campaign changes from a map exercise to a grinding contest of distance, fuel, pilot attrition, night combat, and supply. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, Guadalcanal is not just another island. It becomes a test of the very assumption many admirals still need to believe that the United States will lose heart when the cost rises. Instead, the cost rises for both sides, and the Americans remain. In Tokyo and major fleet headquarters, staff maps of the Solomons grow crowded with arrows, convoy tracks, and overlapping radii. Destroyers are reassigned. Cruisers are pushed hard, submarines are tasked, Army reinforcements are requested, delayed, rerouted, or landed in fragments. Every plan collides with the same brutal fact. The fight is now inside a logistical vice where Japan must move men and supplies down long, vulnerable routes under increasing air pressure. Japanese naval officers answer in the way they know best at first aggressive action. Night surface forces race south in what Allied sailors will call the Tokyo Express. Destroyers thunder through black channels at high speed, throwing white wakes under moonlight, carrying troops, drums of fuel, ammunition, rice. Crews work in darkness with practiced urgency, offloading by hand, by raft, by push overboard. Then they turn north before dawn to avoid air attack from Henderson Field. It is daring seamanship. It is also a sign of constraint. Destroyers are being used as fast transports because slower cargo ships are too vulnerable. The men making these choices understand the trade-off. Destroyers consumed in transport duty are destroyers not screening fleets, not hunting submarines, not preserving strength for future battles. But Guadalcanal punishes delay. Every day the Americans hold Henderson Field. They tighten control of the surrounding seas and skies. So the Japanese admirals keep striking. At Savo Island, Japanese cruisers achieve one of the most devastating night victories in naval history, catching Allied ships off guard and sending several to the bottom. For a moment, the old confidence surges back. Training, discipline, optics, night fighting skill, torpedoes. These are still Japanese advantages, and they are lethal. Yet even victories like Savo fail to produce decisive strategic effect because the Americans keep bringing in more men, more aircraft, more ships. This is the pattern that begins to break minds as much as fleets. Japanese commanders win tactical engagements and still lose ground. They sink cruisers and destroyers, but Henderson Field still operates. They land reinforcements, but starvation and disease spread inland. They damage American forces, but new American forces appear. The campaign becomes a machine that converts Japanese excellence into attrition. In staff discussions, the language grows increasingly harsh and practical. Tonnage shortfalls, fuel expenditure, losses in trained aviators, ship maintenance deferred, Army-Navy coordination failures, misread intelligence, overextended commitments. The confidence of early 1942 does not vanish overnight, but it is forced to coexist with a widening recognition that Japan is fighting the wrong kind of war. This is no longer a short campaign that can be decided by shock and perimeter defense. This is a contest of replacement. American industry now reveals itself not as a distant future threat, but as a present battlefield fact. Aircraft losses that would cripple one side for months are absorbed by the other and replaced. Damaged ships return repaired. Fresh units arrive with increasing regularity. Construction, transport, training, and maintenance form a system that keeps feeding the front. Japanese admirals can see the outputs in combat reports even when they cannot see the factories themselves. And with every report, a pre-war assumption dies a little more. The United States is not showing the fatigue they expected. If anything, Guadalcanal hardens American resolve. Casualties mount, ships burn at night in Iron Bottom Sound. Pilots vanish over jungle and sea. Marines and soldiers fight in mud, fever, hunger, and shell fire. Yet the Americans continue to reinforce, continue to attack, continue to absorb punishment without signaling any interest in compromise. By late 1942, Japanese naval leadership is trapped between doctrine and arithmetic. Doctrine says seek decisive opportunities, strike boldly, impose losses. Arithmetic says every such effort now costs Japan veterans, shipping, fuel, and aircraft that cannot be replaced at the same rate. Admirals and staff officers do not need a public declaration to understand what this means. In internal evaluations and candid conversations, the war is beginning to look less like a path to negotiated settlement and more like an accelerating drain. Some still argue that one great victory might restore the balance. Others focus increasingly on preserving strength, shortening lines, and reducing exposure. These are not the instincts of men expecting the enemy to tire first. They are the instincts of men measuring their own endurance. When the decision finally comes to evacuate Guadalcanal in early 1943, it is executed skillfully, almost brilliantly, under enemy pressure. Japanese forces withdraw many troops in a difficult operation, and naval professionalism remains intact. But the strategic meaning cannot be hidden. Japan has yielded the initiative in a campaign where initiative was supposed to be everything. The admirals who once counted on American impatience have now watched America endure one of the most vicious campaigns of the Pacific and stay in the fight. Guadalcanal does not end the war. It ends any honest hope that the war will end quickly on Japanese terms. Mid-1943, Imperial Japanese Navy Staff Offices, Tokyo. The room is quiet except for paper, pencils, and the faint mechanical buzz of summer fans moving hot air past blackout curtains. Maps of the Central and South Pacific cover the walls, marked with pins, grease pencil circles, convoy routes, and unit symbols that have to be updated faster now because the front keeps moving. Officers in white and khaki bend over tables under shaded lamps, reading summaries that are less triumphant than they were a year earlier. The language has changed. Not in public communiques, not in newspaper headlines, not in the formal rhetoric of imperial certainty. There, words still speak of spirit, sacrifice, and tactical success. But inside naval memoranda, planning assessments, and operational reviews, another tone emerges, colder and more exact. It is the tone of professionals forced to measure a war that is no longer obeying their original assumptions. They begin to write openly about production disparities. Aircraft losses are not just listed by type and theater, but compared against replacement capacity. Pilot casualties are not merely numbers, but indicators of declining qualitative strength. Merchant shipping sinkings are tracked against tonnage available for fuel. Food, troop movement, and raw materials. Repair times matter. Fuel stocks matter. Escort shortages matter. The war is becoming an accounting problem that courage cannot solve. For admirals who built strategy around the idea that America would tire before mobilizing fully, the evidence now points in the opposite direction. America has mobilized fully, and it is not tiring. Reports from intelligence sections and naval attachés feed into the same conclusion. Use size. Shipyards are producing carriers, escorts, transports, and landing craft in quantities that strain belief when written on a single page. American aircraft production and pilot training pipelines continue to expand. Damaged ships reappear after repairs. New task forces enter contested waters. Amphibious capability grows. Logistical support deepens. What Japanese planners had hoped to delay is now arriving not as a wave, but as a continuous flow. The most painful part is not that the numbers are unknown. It is that many senior officers had known the possibility all along. Yamamoto had warned before the war that Japan could run wild for a limited period, but not indefinitely against American industrial strength. After his death in April 1943, his caution remains like a shadow over later assessments. Staff officers do not always invoke his words directly, but the logic returns in document after document. A prolonged war against the United States favors the United States. Every month compounds the imbalance. Every offensive gamble consumes assets faster than they can be restored. This is where the assumption about American national character finally breaks apart in writing. The pre-war idea that the United States lacked resolve had supported a strategy of shock, perimeter defense, and negotiated settlement. By 1943, internal analysis can no longer treat that idea as reliable. American casualties have not produced political collapse. American defeats did not end mobilization. American distance from the battlefield did not produce detachment. Instead, the attack on Pearl Harbor appears to have unified public will and justified a total national commitment. Japanese admirals do not always phrase this as a moral realization. They phrase it as strategic fact. The enemy is willing to sustain losses and continue offensive operations. The enemy can replace losses at an expanding rate. The enemy economy is functioning as the engine of war. The enemy timetable cannot be controlled by limited Japanese victories. In conference settings, this creates friction. Some commanders still press for decisive operations to regain initiative. Others urge conservation, stronger defensive dispositions, and prioritization of critical areas. Army and Navy disputes sharpen over resource allocation. Which islands must be held? Which can be abandoned? How much shipping can be risked? How fuel should be distributed between fleet training, convoy escort, and frontline operations. Each argument is shaped by the same unspoken admission. Japan no longer possesses the margin to be wrong. At sea and in the air, the consequences of these staff conclusions are visible. Japanese carriers increasingly struggle with pilot quality after cumulative losses among experienced aviators. Surface forces remain dangerous, especially in night engagements. But the strategic environment grows harsher. American radar, coordination, and air cover improve. Submarine pressure on Japanese shipping intensifies. The perimeter, once imagined as a shield, becomes a trap, demanding garrisons, transport, and fuel across distances Japan cannot sustain under constant attack. The admirals are not fools watching this happen. They adapt where they can. They revise plans. They redistribute units. They seek opportunities to inflict disproportionate losses. They study American methods and attempt countermeasures. But adaptation is not the same as recovery. The early war strategy depended on assumptions about American fatigue that are now contradicted by events. And no tactical ingenuity can fully repair a strategic foundation after it has cracked. In private, Some officers become blunt. They describe the war as entering a stage where loss rates and industrial capacity determine outcomes more than operational brilliance. Others cling to language of spirit because spirit is still what they can command directly. Between these poles lies the daily reality of staff work, casualty sheets, fuel tables, convoy reports, replacement forecasts, and increasingly sober estimates of what future battles will cost. This is the point where internal acknowledgement matters most, not because it changes the public story, but because it reveals what Japanese naval leadership understood behind closed doors. They had not merely encountered unexpected resistance. They had misjudged the scale and durability of American national mobilization. They had assumed a ceiling to American will that did not exist in the way they imagined. And because strategy had been built around that assumption, the error now reaches into every theater, every shipping route, every operation order. The war continues, and it will grow even more violent. But by the time these internal assessments settle into the bureaucracy of naval planning, the central question is no longer whether America can be shocked. It is whether Japan can survive the consequences of having shocked America into total war. June 19th, 1944. Philippine Sea. The morning sky is wide, bright, and already busy with radio traffic, engine noise, and tension stretched across hundreds of miles of ocean. On Japanese carrier decks, aircraft are launched into a battle that many officers know must go well if the empire is to preserve any chance of stabilizing the front. Pilots climb into heat and glare. Deck crews wave them forward. Signal flags snap in the wind. Fuel and ordnance teams move with the same professionalism they always have. But the war around them is no longer the war of 1941. American task forces now operate with a density of carriers, escorts, radar coordination, fighter direction, logistics, and replacement depth that would have seemed almost impossible in pre-war planning. Japanese naval commanders can still assemble force. They can still strike. They can still kill. Yet the balance has shifted so decisively that bravery now enters battle carrying the weight of arithmetic already decided elsewhere. As Japanese strike waves move out, they meet a defense shaped by lessons the Americans paid for in blood across Coral Sea, Midway, Guadalcanal, and beyond. Radar picks them up. Fighters are vectored efficiently. Anti-aircraft fire is layered. Coordination is tighter. Recovery, rearming, and relaunch cycles function inside a mature industrial and operational system. Japanese aircraft fall in large numbers. Pilots who survive return to find decks damaged, fuel scarce, command structures strained, or no safe recovery at all. Others never return, swallowed by ocean and distance. The battle becomes a catastrophe for Japanese naval aviation, another one. And this time, the losses cut through the remaining ability to contest the Pacific in the old way. The carrier arm survives in name, but the experienced air power needed to make it decisive is largely gone. By now, the internal admission from earlier reports has become lived reality at every level of command. America did not tire. America expanded. The attack meant to buy time instead triggered a mobilization of industry, manpower, training, and national will on a scale Japan could not match. The strategic hope that the United States would accept a negotiated settlement after suffering early blows collapses under the evidence of years. Each time Japanese planners expected hesitation, the Americans built more ships. Each time Japanese commanders inflicted losses, the Americans returned with more capacity behind them. Each month, Japan fought to preserve options. The range of those options narrowed. What did the Admirals do when their assumptions failed? Some doubled down on offensive doctrine, still searching for a decisive engagement that could restore leverage. Some shifted toward conservation and layered defense, trying to trade space for time even though time now favored the enemy. Some focused on technical and operational adaptation, convoy protection, dispersal, pilot training reforms, fuel prioritization. Some argued bitterly across Army-Navy lines over resources that no longer stretched far enough. All of them, in one form or another, were forced to manage decline. This is the part often flattened in simple retellings. They were not all blind fanatics marching unchanged from first victory to final defeat. Many recognized the strategic error, and internal assessments increasingly reflected that recognition. They understood that the original assumption about American resolve had failed. They understood that industrial mobilization, not just fleet action, was deciding the war. They understood that reports from shipyards and factories could matter as much as battle reports from admirals at sea. But recognition did not create a path out. By late war, decisions became less about winning on original terms and more about delaying collapse, preserving lines, reinforcing threatened sectors, and seeking any operation that might impose enough cost to improve bargaining prospects. Even these efforts were strangled by fuel shortages, pilot losses, shipping destruction, and overwhelming American production. Plans grew more desperate because the strategic foundation beneath them had already been broken years earlier. In staff rooms, on bridges, in command conferences, the war narrowed into hard choices between bad options. Commit a dwindling fleet or preserve it for a later battle that might never come. Train replacements quickly and accept lower quality, or preserve standards and leave units empty. Supply distant garrisons and lose shipping, or abandon them and lose territory without a fight. The admirals made these choices under pressure, often skillfully, sometimes disastrously, always inside a strategic reality they had hoped to avoid. And that reality had been set in motion by a misread at the beginning. They had correctly identified American material power. They had incorrectly judged American endurance. That difference became the hinge of the Pacific War. When post-battle analyses and internal reports acknowledged the imbalance, they were not merely listing shortages. They were recording the consequences of a failed assumption at the highest level of strategy. The Empire had launched war betting that America would grow weary before it grew fully mobilized. Instead, the attack made exhaustion less likely and mobilization more certain. So what did the Japanese admirals do when their assumptions about America failed? They adapted, argued, recalculated, and kept fighting inside a shrinking room. They wrote colder reports. They revised plans around shortages. They admitted, in internal language more than public words, that the war they had expected no longer existed. And in the end, they commanded a navy still capable of courage and tactical skill, but trapped in a conflict whose outcome had been shaped the moment America refused to break.